I just spent the last month reading books, pouring through field guides, and searching the internet to put together the complete guide to sparrows, and I'm going to share it all with you. By the end of this video, you will be confident in your sparrow identification skills. You might want to grab a notebook because here's what we're going to be covering. First, 6 tips to finding more sparrows. Then, basic sparrow anatomy. After that, we're going to go through field marks and then separating sparrows from other sparrows. Then, separating sparrows from non-sparrow lookalikes. After that, I'm going to guide you step by step through all 44 species of sparrows found in the United States and Canada. So to start, here's 7 tips for finding sparrows. Number 1 is listen for chip calls. All sparrows make these calls, and it's not the full-blown song, it's just a little chip. That is a great way for a sparrow to alert you of its presence so that you know it's there, because otherwise they can stay really deep hidden in the brush and you never know that they were there. Number 2 is find the right habitat. A seaside sparrow will never be found in the same habitat as a Baird sparrow, so knowing what habitat you are in and what sparrows are in that habitat will be very helpful when it comes to identifying them and even just finding them. Number 3 is do not wear bright colors and move slowly. You don't just want to be flushing sparrows up because you're moving too fast, and you don't want to wear bright colors because then sparrows can see you before you get a good chance to see them. Tip number 4 is to know when to go. The best time I think to find sparrows is in the winter, because not only will some sparrows only be in your area in the winter, but there's also less leaves and brush around, so it makes it a lot easier to just even see them and get a close idea of them. And tip number 5 is to narrow down the genus of a sparrow. So imagine this. You're out birding and you see a Brewer sparrow. Now, a Brewer sparrow is in the genus Spizella. There are only 5 sparrows in the genus Spizella, so if it looks like a Spizella sparrow, then you only have 4 birds that it could potentially be. So narrowing down the genus will really help you when it comes to identifying them. Number 6 is to study the sparrows you expect to find in the field before going into the field. If you have a specific sparrow that you want to go see, you should really brush up on that sparrow, which is why you'll want to stick around to the end of the video where I'm going to guide you step by step through all 44 species of sparrows in the United States and Canada. So now we're going to go through basic sparrow anatomy just so you know what I'm talking about later in the video when I talk about field marks. So we have here on the screen a Grasshopper Sparrow, and I'm just going to walk you through all the potential field marks it could have. So a field mark is a mark you can see in the field of a bird that would then helps you then identify it. For example, on the Grasshopper Sparrow, we have the very large bill and the very short tail. Those are very good identifying field marks. So let's see what other field marks this Grasshopper Sparrow could have. We have the yellow lores right here, right above the eye. We have the fully complete eye ring here. That's a great field mark. We have the belly here. Now, whether or not the belly has streaks or not is a great way to separate several species right off the bat. So we can see the Grasshopper Sparrow does not have any stripes on its belly or flanks. There are some streaks up here on the upper belly. Now the bill is also a good field mark to pay attention to, as sparrows have different size bills, and that's a great way to separate them. Tails are also a great field mark to look for, as well as streaking on the back. The pattern and color of streaking can really help when identifying them. Facial pattern and crown patterns also a very good identifying field mark for a lot of sparrows, so make sure you check that out too. So an example of a very good identifying field mark would be the black triangle patch on a black-throated sparrow. Now, if you use field marks to separate birds species apart, so in the case of the black-throated sparrow, let's say you have the black-chinned sparrow and the black-throated sparrow. They both look kind of similar, but the black-throated sparrow has 2 very key identifying field marks. First, black-throated sparrows have a triangle throat patch and 2 bold white stripes. Those are very key identifying field marks when it comes to separating the 2 birds. For sparrows overall, there are several field marks you just need to consider when making an ID. Tails and wings are the most functional parts of any bird's body, and in many cases they differ noticeably in length, shape, and pattern between species. So that is a great field mark to pay attention to. And the traditional advice is to start at the head of a sparrow and then work your way down. But that's only because in the early 1870s it was too costly to paint the entire body of a sparrow, so all of the field plates just had the head of a sparrow. And you can identify sparrows by their head in most cases, but here is what Marshall Liff says. A new technique is to identify a sparrow, consider first its shape, then its habitat and habits, and finally its plumage field marks. Now, to separate sparrows from other sparrows, here are a few tips for you. Number 1, look for separating field marks, of course, and just pay close attention. A lot of sparrows can be very similar, so just make sure you're not making any hasty IDs and just search the bird thoroughly for field marks. Now, range can really help narrow down to likely species, but it is not a good field mark to rely upon because birds do get outside of their ranges, and if you're just assuming birds are a certain sparrow based on its range, then you're going to miss out on some rare sparrows. Now, there are a lot of sparrow-like birds, and that's exactly what we're going to go through next, is how to separate Sparrow Look-alikes from actual sparrows. Now, the four buntings can look kind of sparrow-like, really just the females. As far as painted buntings go, the dullest is always going to be green, female and young of course, and sparrows are just never green. They're either a brown, tan, or black. Now, indigo, varied, and lazuli buntings look brown and are more sparrow-like. But overall, there's just little markings on these three buntings. Clues like dull breast streaks, whitish wing bars, and thick bills really help separate these. Now, dick sissels could look kind of sparrow-like, but they just lack distinctive tones. They're tan-brown, they have very short, wide tails, while most sparrows have longer tails. They also have very long wingtips, broadly streaked backs, and very heavy, pale bills, unlike most sparrows. And pine siskins are very small, cute birds that can look kind of sparrow-like. Just look for their very long wings, and they have a very, very sharp, pointed bill. And they're also a lot more acrobatic than sparrows, and are more finch-like overall. Now, speaking of finches, we have the house finch, which is very brown, long, and just not a whole lot of overall markings. It has a notched tail, and very blurry, streaked underparts with a thick, curved bill. Now, sparrows don't really have curved bills, especially as much as in a finch. As far as Cassins and purple finches go, the females and juveniles could also be confused as sparrows, but just look for stronger face patterns. Both Cassin and purple have some white eyebrows on their face, and very heavy, short bills. Now, a female or juvenile red-winged blackbird could potentially be confused as a sparrow, but just remember, no sparrow is as large as a red-winged blackbird. Cowbirds, however, are smaller and more sparrow-like. Females and juveniles can be mistaken, and even some famous ornithologists have been confused and called brown-headed cowbirds a sparrow. Bobolinks are larger than sparrows and have longer bills distinguishable from sparrows. Now, snow buntings, even the darkest snow buntings, have a very extensive white in the tail and wing, and sparrows just don't have that. You've got the Lark Sparrow and the Vesper Sparrow, and they do have some white in their tail, just not as much as a snow bunting, and snow buntings also have a lot more white in the wing too. Now, longspurs are a lot more likely to be confused than all the other birds that we talked about, but they're just larger and they have very short tails with long wings, and are overall just large-headed. However, in the winter, females and even males can look kind of similar to sparrows. Just look for their larger size, and they like open, barren habitats, which very few sparrows like that kind of habitat. Now, for a quick overview of the sparrow family, in this video I've included two Old World sparrows as well that can be found in the United States. We have the house sparrow and the Eurasian tree sparrow, and then the 42 New World sparrows. Now, the habitat range of these New World sparrows is very vast. Some live in marshes while others live in very dry desert brush. And as a side note, Juncos and Towhees are considered sparrows, so I've put them in this video as well. And now it's time to take a deep dive into 44 species of sparrows found in the United States. To start with Old World sparrows found in the US, there's only two of them, the house sparrow and the Eurasian tree sparrow. We're going to start with the house sparrow. Typically a bird of urban and rural areas, can be found anywhere, but not likely in remote areas. It is found all over the United States and all over the world, really. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive, especially the males. We have the chestnut wings, black throat patch, white cheek, and kind of brown rufous behind the eye, and gray cap. Females are a little less distinctive, but just note the big bill. Males have it too, as you can see. A little bit of white on the wing and just very clean underside, and also a bit of a white eyebrow stripe there, and then again brown head. Now, the big conical bill that they have here is black in the breeding season and turns yellow in the non-breeding season. They do have a very distinctive chirping sound, which once learned, it is quite easy to identify them. Now, when house sparrows lift off, they fly deep into the middle of bushes and sit in groups of 3 or 4, which no other sparrows do this, especially no other New World sparrows do this. So that's a great way to identify them even from a car as you're driving down the road. Next up is Eurasian tree sparrow, and tends to be found in wilder areas than the house sparrow. In the US, it can only be found in and around St. Louis, Missouri, kind of like a 90-mile radius around the city, where it likely escaped in the 1870s and now has a small population. For field marks, they're also quite distinctive, especially in the US. We have the chestnut cap, white stripe on the nape that then goes up into the cheek area, a lot of black by the bill. Bill is a lot like the house sparrow's bill. Unstreaked belly and then chestnut back. And then the white cheek patch contrasts with the black also on the cheeks. So the first New World sparrow is the olive sparrow, and these guys are limited to brushy areas, thickets, and woodlands of very far southern Texas. As far as field marks go, these guys are pretty distinctive. You'll notice right away the overall olive yellow color of their wings. They've got their big brownish bill, orange or red eye. As you can see in the picture on the left, their eye color does have a little bit of variation. Gray belly and pink legs and feet. And a lot of times they do have a stripe that goes right through their eye, and then several stripes on the head too, although these can be hard to see as this bird is just foraging in the brush. To separate from similar species, there really aren't that many that could be confused with the olive sparrow. However, wintering green-tailed Towhees could potentially be confused. The difference is the Towhee is thicker billed, is a lot larger in size, and has darker and grayer upper parts. Another good field mark and key distinction here, if you happen to get a good look of it, is the tarsus. This is another word for the leg. On the olive sparrow, these are pink as well as their toes, and on the Towhee, it is dark gray to blackish, especially in winter, which would be when these guys would overlap the most. And it's really helpful to listen for scratching sounds, because that is often going to be the best way to locate them, as they're typically very deep down in the brush. Next one up is the black-throated sparrow, and these are a more southwestern specialty sparrow, found in arid scrublands, deserts, and open areas of the southwestern United States and Mexico. For field marks, these guys are pretty distinctive. They have their black bib, as you can see here. Two bold white stripes on its face. These are visible even in juveniles, which we'll get to in a little bit. And the contrast between the plain brown back and the black tail is visible even in flight too. So if you happen to get a fleeting glimpse of these guys, that can be a good field mark to look for. Now there are a couple species that could be confused with the black-throated sparrows, so here's what you want to look for. Unlike the House and Harris's sparrow, the black-throated sparrow has no streaking on it. Now some juvenile black-throated sparrows do have some inconspicuous streaks above and below, but here's what you should look for to separate from the adult sagebrush and bell sparrows. The black-throated has an unstreaked crown, as you can see right here, the broad white supercilium, which is that big white stripe above the eye, on the steel blue head, and I don't have any juveniles pictured here, but it is quite obvious that big white stripe is a good field mark to look for. And in the spring, these sparrows like to perch on top of brush and other plants and sing, so that's a great way to get good pictures and looks at these guys. Next up is the American tree sparrow, and if you're in the United States, you're only going to see these guys in the winter, as they breed in far northern tundra, and they winter in weedy fields and brushy areas in the United States and southern Canada. They do come to feeders, so that is often when you get a good look at them. As far as field marks go, these guys are pretty distinctive. Look for the rusty cap, gray face, and a dark spot in the center of the chest. And as you can see, there are no streaks on its belly, which helps separate from several species. They do have a rusty eyeline, as you can see here and over in this picture right here. That's an important detail, which we'll get to more on that in a little bit. And at any distance, the head looks gray while the tail is dark, so that's another great way to identify these guys. Now, a popular confusion species here is the chipping sparrow, and here's how you separate it. Chipping sparrow has a much thinner bill that is more of a straight line instead of this point here on the American tree sparrow. They also have a black line that goes through their eye instead of a rusty eye line. It's more prominent in this bird on the left. So to separate from chipping sparrow, look for the thinner bill and the black line through the eye. Swamp sparrows have a shorter tail and are more chunky. The American tree sparrow has a very long tail, so that's a great way to separate it from those species. And in the winter, it does form flocks, so if you find one, there's probably more nearby. Next up is the Brewer's sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, they are found in sagebrush flats of western North America. As far as field marks go, these guys are actually pretty limited, but there are several subtle field marks to notice. Overall plain, and that's kind of a field mark in itself. The lack of field marks can be kind of helpful. They do have a streaked back, as you can see here, with straight lines instead of scales. And you can see there are some faint facial markings on here to look for, and a pretty slender bill. But this can often be kind of hard to judge, so it's not a field mark to rely upon when separating from other species. And the flanks of the bird, which is the sides right here, are unstreaked. That is a pretty important detail when comparing to other species. Overall, plain plumage really help when separating other species. Also consider it sagebrush habitat, as that would eliminate several species right off the bat. And if you get good views of these guys, the Brewer Sparrow is unlikely to be confused with any other brown Spizella Sparrow species. And there is a little bit of variation within the colors of these guys. As you can see here, some are rusty while some are grayer, and some are very plain-faced while others have darker whiskers and eye lines. But one thing to keep in mind is the lore, which is right above the beak right here, is always plain, and the eye ring is usually conspicuous. It's a pretty faint eye ring compared to some sparrows, but you can always see it. And like I said earlier, habitat is a pretty good separator. And if you're finding this video helpful, then I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like. It took a lot of time to make, and I hope that it really helps you out. So thank you a lot for hitting the like button. Next up is the chipping sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, you can find these guys in woodlands, gardens, and suburban areas. They're not a grassland sparrow that much, although you might be able to find them there. And their range is pretty big throughout most of North America. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive. Look for the black eye line, rusty cap, we've got rusty wings here, gray face, and then white unstreaked belly. The one on the left here is a non-breeding adult, while the one on the right is a breeding adult. So as you can see, there are some differences in color versus the breeding season and the non-breeding season. Now these are very small when it comes to sparrows, but they have a long notched tail. You can see the notch right there. It's quite visible. If you happen to get good looks at it, that is a very good field mark. That will separate it from a lot of species. And they do have a pretty fine small bill. As you can see, it is black in the breeding season and a more pink in the non-breeding season. Overall, these are just very slim sparrows, which gives them a pretty distinctive shape. And notice that the eye line goes all the way through the eye. That's a pretty important detail as well. To separate from similar species, the chipping sparrow is more blackish of a tail than the Brewer's sparrow, and also has a different rump color than that of the field and clay-colored sparrow's tan rump. Now, western birds do average paler and duller than eastern birds on average, and they do have a pretty distinctive song, so you might want to learn that if you're looking to find these guys. Next up is clay-colored sparrow. And this is one of my favorite sparrows. As far as habitat goes, they can be found in grasslands and shrubby areas in central North America. They winter down south and then breed up in Canada and the United States. For field marks, they have a plain gray nape, as you can see right here, and then the two white lines are pretty distinctive. And of course the unstreaked belly. To separate from similar species, the clay-colored is small and long-tailed like all other Spizella sparrows, so it's unlikely to be confused with any other than the chipping and the Brewer sparrow. Separate from the chipping sparrow by rump color, back color, and head pattern. So if you remember, the chipping sparrow has a red head, while the clay-colored sparrow, it's brown. And the rump varies from gray-brown to brown, but it never shows the bright bluish silver tone of a typical chipping sparrow. Now the white line that goes from the clay-colored sparrow's beak to its ear starts off a little skinnier and then gets wider, versus the Brewer sparrow where it is just uniform line straight all the way across. Next up is the field sparrow, and I really like these guys. They're a very simple sparrow and very easy to learn. As far as habitat goes, you can find them in brushy fields, grasslands, or open woodlands in eastern and central North America. For field marks, there's overall plain with a buffy face, pink bill, and long tail, and unstreaked belly. They do have a little bit of rusty color on their crown and behind the eye. And once you recognize its song, finding these will be easier, and western populations do tend to be grayer and duller. There really aren't any species that this could be confused for. Just look for that pink bill and then overall clean appearance. Next up is the black-chinned sparrow. This is a southwestern United States specialty. Their range does go down into Mexico. You can find them in arid slopes, canyons, and scrublands. For field marks, pretty distinctive black throat patch that goes up into the lores as well. On the right here we have a female. As you can see, there are no black patch, but we'll get to more about that in a little bit. They do have a rusty back and wings, and these species do have a very long but also narrow tail, which is a great way to identify them as well. Now the black throat patch separates this sparrow from other sparrows in its range, and the overall gray color helps too. It can often be identified as juncos, however, as the subspecies of the dark-eyed junco out there often have some brown tinged backs, And while it's Junco-like in plumage, the black-chinned sparrow is structurally very different. Tiny sparrow with a very long tail, small head, and small bill. So that's a great way to separate it from the Juncos. Next up is the Rufous-Crowned Sparrow, and another southwestern specialty of arid habitats including scrublands, chaparral, and rocky slopes down into Mexico as well. Found feeding under vegetation in rocky slopes, so very unique habitat here. And field marks are pretty distinctive on this bird. We've got the rufous crown, grayish brown overall body, a lightly streaked breast. Eye ring is broken behind the eye, as you can see just a little bit right there. It's not typically noticeable in the field though, and it's pretty uniformly colored, which makes it seem plain at a distance, and it has a pretty distinctive head pattern. We've got a little bit of white with that rufous crown up there, which is why it's called the Rufous-Crowned Sparrow. The eye ring and also the dark throat stripe there is typically pretty visible, so that's another great field mark. And like I said earlier, a lot of these have a small white line on the crown. And as far as similar species go, there really aren't that many. Now, it could technically be confused for the Rufous-Winged Sparrow, but look for that heavy blue-gray bill to separate it from Rufous-Winged Sparrow. And it could also be confused for a Towhee, but it's a lot more secretive than a Towhee, and you don't often get great looks at them. Next up is the five-striped sparrow, and it does have 5 stripes on it. Southeast Arizona specialty here. Its range goes down to Mexico as well. Field marks, this guy's really distinctive with those 5 stripes. We've got black throat patch too, overall gray with a long tail and brown back and wing coverts. Now they do have a black breast spot, which is also a great way to identify them, but the 5 white stripes on its head are going to be pretty obvious. And of course, to separate from similar species, that unique head pattern is a key identifier. It could technically be confused for a black-throated sparrow, but it has a long tail and a slender bill versus the black-throated sparrow's more blocky appearance. And I could confuse it for lark sparrow as well, because lark sparrows have that very intricate head pattern. But the 5-striped is always found in steep, thorny slopes, unlike the lark sparrows, which are never found there ever. And sagebrush sparrows could be confused for this because they have a little bit of a head pattern too, but the sagebrush sparrow prefers the sagebrush flats. Now this is a very skulky bird, and 5-striped sparrows tend to stay very hidden in dense vegetation, although they do perch on top of vegetation when singing in the summer, and the juveniles are rarely ever seen. So next up we have the Cassin sparrow, and this is a bird of dry grasslands, shrubby areas, and prairies in the southwestern United States, and its range does go down into Mexico. As far as field marks go, these guys have a very streaked back, as you can see, although this does wear and the intricate upper part pattern can nearly disappear as the feathers wear and bleach in the desert sun. They also have a very thin eye ring, as you can kind of start to see one there, and on the one on the left you can kind of see a little bit of an eye ring there. They have a pretty thin and long bill, which is kind of unique for sparrows. That can be a good clue to separating them, and at any distance in the field, Cassin sparrows are pretty gray, and overall just a very plain bird. To separate from similar species, an adult Cassin sparrow is intricately patterned and distinctive, and it's unlikely to be confused with any other North American sparrow. But as this pattern wears and becomes more gray and bleached in the desert sun, here are a few birds that you're going to be on the lookout for that could be potential confusing species here. Generally, these are grayer than the Botteri sparrow. Botteri sparrow is also flatter headed and has a thicker bill, so that's a good way to separate them from that. The Grasshopper Sparrow is brighter above and below and has a very large bill, also a slightly shorter tail too. And the Savannah Sparrow is streaked on the breast and back, not just the back as in the case of the Cassin Sparrow. And Brewer sparrows are going to be smaller with very long and narrow tails and very small pink bills. That's a great way to separate them by the bill color and size. And the Botteri sparrow range also goes into Arizona and Texas, and then they meet down in Mexico. But Botteri sparrows in Texas are going to be duller and more similar to the Cassin sparrow. But one thing to remember is all Botteri sparrows are going to be streaked above, while on the Cassin sparrow it can be more scaly. And you can often hear these guys sing, and their song is different from other sparrows. That's a great way to separate them as well. Another note here is some Cassin sparrows are more rusty colored, while others are a grayer color. Next up is Bachman's Sparrow, and this is a bird of the southeastern pine savannas, pine forests, and scrubby areas. As far as field marks go, these are bulky, long-tailed, and flat-headed sparrows. As you can see, we got the big bill, the rather flat head, and streaked crown. We also have a rusty eye line that does not go through the eye. Now that's an important detail because, as I talked about earlier with the chipping sparrow's eye line goes all the way through the eye. For the Bachman sparrow, it stops at the eye. Now, to separate from similar species, there are several species that could be confused with the Bachman sparrow, but the long silvery bill is a good way to distinguish it, and the graduated tail also helps quite a bit. Now, habitat will help a lot in identification, as these birds are only found in open pine savannas of the southeastern United States. Now, the field sparrow could be confused, but here are a few things to remember. The Bachman sparrow has a very dull bill compared to the field sparrow, which has a pink bill. And the field sparrow is more of crisply marked and more pinkish colored, while the Bachman is more reddish and scaly and just a little overall shaggier. Cassin sparrows, like we just talked about, are smaller billed than the Bachman sparrow, and that actually makes the head look smaller of a Cassin's too, versus the big bill and the rather large head of the Bachman sparrow. Now, I found these guys in Florida by learning their song first, and then that let me know that there was the presence of one, so then I could actually see it. Now we have the Botteri's sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, it is very limited in the U.S. with southeastern Arizona and very, very far southern Texas. And in Texas and Arizona, they're going to be limited to very specific habitat, such as open grasslands, pastures, and shrubby areas. For field marks, we have a buffy plumage with streaks, a pale eyebrow, as you can see right here, and a plain face. They do have a bit of a yellow patch. You can kind of start to see it on this bird, but that is not always visible. And that's not really a great field mark to make a confident ID from. A better one would be the long rounded tail, flat crown. Now, to separate from several confusion species, you want to look for the long rounded tail. The flat crown, it's much like the Bachman sparrow, where it has a rather flat head and a big bluish bill. Look for the streaks on the back versus the scales of the Cassin sparrow. And to separate from Rufous-Crowned Sparrow, look for a plainer face. A Rufous-Crowned Sparrow has some black streaks on its cheeks, and I think it has a little bit of white and a white eye ring that's pretty prominent. So just look for a plainer overall face when separating the Botteri Sparrow from the Rufous-Crowned Sparrow. Now, Savannah Sparrows are neatly streaked above and below, and they do have smaller bills as well. Like I mentioned earlier, the Arizona Botteri Sparrows are going to be a brighter and more vibrant bird, while the Texas birds are going to be a little duller. During the breeding season, you want to be listening for its song, as they often sing from elevated perches, and that can alert you to a bird that is nearby. Next up is the Rufous-Winged Sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, these are pretty limited in the United States. They're only going to be found in arid brushlands, thorny scrub, and grassy areas in southeastern Arizona, and their range does go south into Mexico. As far as field marks go, they do have a rufous patch on their wings. However, that rufous wing patch is not always visible, so you do want to look for buffy underparts that have a little bit of streaking and a rusty stripe that goes through the eye. To separate from similar species, the rufous wing patch, if you happen to catch a glimpse of it, will help a lot. And it has a more yellowish bill instead of a gray bill of a lot of other sparrow species, so make sure you're looking for that. To separate from chipping sparrow, look for the two mustache stripes right here. You can see one right there, another right there. Chipping sparrows do not have that, and chipping sparrows do have the black line instead of the rusty line through the eye, so make sure you pay attention for that too. Now, this could be confused with the Rufous-Crowned Sparrow, which has a much larger range. Now, Rufous-Crowned is going to be found in more rocky, brushy canyons, while Rufous-Winged would be in grassier areas. Now, these two species could potentially mix in sites with desert grasslands and gulches. However, Rufous-Crowned is going to be larger, heavier, and darker than the Rufous-Winged. Now, the streaked rusty crown could recall an American tree sparrow, but that is going to be very unlikely just geographically. And American tree sparrows have a spot on their breast and do not have the two mustache stripes. Now, the species will sing often, even in the middle of the day, which is kind of unusual for sparrows. And a fun fact, their breeding is largely dependent on rain. So if southeastern Arizona gets a lot of rain, they're probably going to start nesting, but if they don't, they just won't nest. Alright, now we have the Grasshopper Sparrow. Now, this is a rather common sparrow found in grasslands, meadows, and prairies across all of North America, and they're quite distinctive in field marks, they have an odd shape with their very large bill. The picture on the left, you can really see just how big this bill is in relation to the head, and that actually makes their head look really big and have this kind of like oval appearance to it. The yellow lores can be a good way to distinguish them too, but the color of these can kind of vary across its range, so it's not the best field mark to go from, but it is a pretty good one if you happen to get a good look at it. It has a white eye ring and a pretty like streaked back. Some birds do have a yellow wing patch, as you can see right here, and it does have some streaking on its neck, but it has a clean belly. And western birds are duller above with less chestnut in the feathers of the back. Now, to separate from similar species, this one's distinctive if it is seen well. You got the short tail and just overall odd shape. Now, there could be several confusion species, but the Grasshopper Sparrow overall is very distinctive if you see it well. We've got the short tail and then the big beak and head, and that's really pretty distinctive, but you could confuse it with a Nelson Sparrow. However, the Nelson's is a much deeper orange and yellow, and the LeConte's Sparrow is just overall more colorful. Henslow Sparrow has a dark head and bill versus Grasshopper Sparrow's just pale face and striped crown. And you can see Grasshopper Sparrow has a white stripe through its crown, Henslow's does not. Now, the Baird Sparrow has heavier streaking than a Grasshopper, especially on its chest area, and Baird Sparrow also has a more rounded head. Now, the Grasshopper Sparrow is quite secretive in its grassy habitats, so you won't always find these perched out in the open, although they do occasionally perch on fences and stuff as you're driving down the road. Next, we have the Baird Sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, this bird's a little pickier. It likes tall grass prairies and grasslands in North America. Now, these birds are rarely ever seen in migration and a lot rarer on wintering grounds, so the best time to see them is on breeding grounds in Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, and southern Canada. Now, as far as field marks go, these guys have quite a few. Overall, we have quite a bit of streaking on these guys. Faint eye ring over here in this bird right here. Pretty deeply notched tail, as you can see, and just a medium-sized bill. Its head also has a very round shape to it, which separates it from the Grasshopper Sparrow. Now, as you can see in the bird here on the right, and you can see a little bit in the bird on the left, they do have a chestnut shoulder patch, but that is not always visible. Now, another note here on the tail and bill is it has a fairly short tail for a sparrow, and the bill is pretty heavy at the base. Now, to separate from similar species, we have the Savannah Sparrow, which can be kind of confusing. The Savannah Sparrow has a less patterned back and a smaller head and a smaller bill. The bill is typically pink on a Savannah Sparrow. Also, the nape on a Baird Sparrow, you can't see it in these pictures, but it is buffy yellow, unlike the Savannah Sparrow's dull gray nape. Now, I actually saw the Baird Sparrow, and they share the same habitat with the Grasshopper Sparrow, so you just need to identify them carefully. Note the bolder streaks on a Baird Sparrow and the lack of yellow lores. The Baird Sparrow also has a slightly smaller bill. Now, this species is pretty elusive and often found in dense grassy areas, and they prefer to run on the ground when flushed instead of just flying. Next up, we have the Henslow Sparrow, and this is a bird of grasslands, marshes, and wet meadows in eastern North America, and then winter in the southeastern United States. As far as field marks go, we have the olive head, the very big bill, almost like a Grasshopper Sparrow's bill. We have a notched tail and some streaking on the upper parts. And a good field mark to pay attention to here is the bill. It's a pretty big bill, but also notice how the upper mandible has virtually no interruption between it and the forehead. Just almost a clean line going straight across there. And this bird is just yellowish overall. To separate from other species, habitat aids quite a bit in identification. It's not often seen, more often heard than seen, so it's best if you identify its call. It has a very short insect-like to sick call. Now, Henslow's sparrows also share their winter areas with LeConte sparrows, but Henslow's is just more richly colored overall, and LeConte sparrows have wide straw-colored stripes down their back and an orange outline around the grayer ear areas. They also have a smaller, slender bill. You can also separate Nelson and Saltmarsh Sparrows the exact same way. Their bills are longer and thinner and more pointed compared to the big bill of the Henslow Sparrow. And this bird does not overlap at all with the Seaside Sparrow, as Seaside Sparrow is found exclusively in salt marshes. And as far as suitable habitat goes for these guys, it can be kind of scarce. So eBird's actually a great way to find where you can actually see these guys in the Midwest. Next is the LeConte Sparrow. At all seasons, LeConte Sparrows are found in damp areas like weedy fields, marshy edges, or prairies with little to no woody vegetation. This is not a bird of the dry upland prairie. As far as field marks go, we have the gray face, and you can see there's quite a bit of a face pattern. We've got that big, broad orange stripe, and then some orange going up to the bill. We also have a black stripe right behind the eye, and a lot of streaking on the flanks and neck, although it does have a clean white belly. And their tail is the exact same color as their back. Now when they spread their tail during takeoff or landing, you can see a very clear wedge shape, which is helpful for identification. Now, as far as separating from similar species goes, a combination of habitat and just overall field marks separates a lot of sparrows, and you can actually narrow it down to just two confusion species, the Nelson Sparrow and the Saltmarsh Sparrow. Now to separate from Nelson Sparrow, look for the streaked nape. You can kind of see a little bit of streaks there. Nelson Sparrows has a very clean gray nape, and the tan breast separates it from Saltmarsh Sparrow. Saltmarsh Sparrow is also a lot bolder streaked overall. And even in flight, the orange head and silver nape are very conspicuous. Now this is a very skulky sparrow, so you'll often find it in dense vegetation, which makes it very important to know what they look like when perched or flying. And just a tip here is to look for overall paleness. We have the Nelson Sparrows now, and pretty similar habitat to the LeConte Sparrow. Nelson Sparrow is only found in salt marshes, wet meadows, and coastal grasslands in North America. As far as field marks go for these guys, we have a lot less streaking than the LeConte Sparrow. You can see the clean gray nape here. We do have that big orange stripe that goes by the head, brown streak behind the eye, and then gray right directly below the eye. You can see some faint streaks there, and in the bird on the right you can see we have some streaks on the flanks with some white streaking right down the back. Now, as I mentioned earlier, separate from the LeConte Sparrow by plain gray nape and also the bolder upper parts. You can kind of see those white stripes with the brown contrasting. Now to separate from Saltmarsh Sparrow, which they're often found in the same habitat, look for the shorter bill and just less contrasty overall. It's also a lot smaller than the Saltmarsh Sparrow, and it's also just much smaller than the Saltmarsh Sparrow. Now there is some regional variation in the Nelson Sparrow. Inland birds are typically brighter than Atlantic birds, which are a lot duller and grayer. Now we have the Saltmarsh Sparrow. Now, habitat alone is a very good identifier here, as they are only found in salt marshes and coastal areas in eastern North America. As far as field marks go, we have that classic orange stripe over the eye as usual, then the black behind the eye, gray below, but it's a lot darker of a gray than Nelson's and LeConte Sparrows. Very long pointed bill here with pretty extensive streaking all the way down the belly. Now to separate from Nelson's, LeConte's, and even Seaside Sparrows, it is very large overall with a bigger head than other marsh sparrows and blurrier streaks than the Nelson's, which is very crisp streaking. Abert again is a great way to find a good place to see them, as they are pretty localized in salt marsh habitat. Next up is the Seaside Sparrow. As far as habitat goes, these guys are restricted entirely to coastal salt marshes along the Atlantic and Gulf Coast. For field marks, they're also pretty distinctive. You can see gray face, most of them have yellow lores, and as far as structures go, they have a very long, kind of thin bill. That kind of varies across their range. A lot of geographic variation here as far as color goes. The one on the left is an Atlantic coast bird, and the one on the right is a Gulf Coast bird. Gulf Coast birds are more colorful and tend to be a little darker too. You'll notice we have a little bit of streaking up here on the upper belly, but a pretty clean underbelly here, and on the Gulf Coast bird there's these white stripes, white throat patch as well, and just a very dark overall bird. They're pretty distinctive if you get a good look at them, but there are a few sparrows that you could be confused with, really only the marsh sparrows. The Seaside Sparrow is larger overall and has a bigger head than the smaller marsh sparrows, and blurrier streaks than a Nelson's. A Nelson's kind of has penciled, while a Seaside Sparrow is a lot blurrier. Now if you want to go find these guys, I would recommend using eBird to find a good location, as they are not found in every salt marsh, but it's very easy if you just get on eBird to find a good hotspot to find them. Next up is Savannah Sparrow, and this is a very common sparrow across all of North America with very diverse habitats including grasslands, fields, marshes, and coastal areas throughout all of North America. For field marks, they are quite distinctive. You can see we have some streaking on the flanks and upper parts, and then a clean white belly. They also have a fairly thin, pale bill, and the yellowed lores right here, that's the area right on top of the bill, and you can't always see these. This is not a great field mark to go from, but it is rather a more confirming field mark in case you happen to get a good look at them. The yellow can also be limited on some birds too. These birds are traditionally distinguished from Vesper Sparrows by the absence of white in their tail. However, it is actually better if you look for the finer, more penciled streaks than any song or Vesper Sparrow would have. Savannah sparrows also gather in small to medium flocks during migration in winter, sometimes up to even 15 and 20 birds, while the Cintrunx sparrows, which is Baird's and Henslow sparrows, do not flock at all. If you see a flock of sparrows, then it is certainly not one of those two. And even if they are in the same area as Savannah sparrows, they're going to be staying much deeper into the grass than Savannah sparrows, which prefer to be more open habitat. Now, they do have several subspecies that have quite variable appearance across its range. If you want to go deeper into the subspecies, I recommend getting this book, the Peterson's Reference Guide to the Sparrows of North America. In this book, they go very, very deep into the subspecies side, which I thought was quite helpful. I'll put a link to it down in the video description below. Next up is the fox sparrow, and this is a very large sparrow found in undergrowth, in forest, shrubby areas, and gardens across all of North America. For field marks, you'll notice they have a very, very thick bill, long tail, and overall just a very stocky appearance. The red subspecies right here is very distinctive, but if we go over here, this is also a fox sparrow. You'll notice they have the same bill shape and just overall stocky appearance with a lot of speckling on the belly. This is another subspecies here. Have the big bill, and then we have some more speckling on the belly. So that's why structure is a very good way to identify sparrows versus color, because these three sparrows here are all the same species, at least currently they are. They might be split later into several different species, but right now they are all fox sparrows. So that's why you want to look for structures such as bill and tail shape first before you make an ID. We also have on these subspecies a white eye-ring. As far as the range of these subspecies go, again, I highly recommend you get the book to go deeper into this, but as far as range goes, the red is going to be more of an eastern bird, breeding up in Canada and then wintering it down south in the States, while the sooty subspecies is going to be a west coast bird, breeding up in Canada and then wintering on the west coast. Now, to separate from similar species, there aren't very many that could be confused. You could confuse it with a song sparrow, but just look for the very thick bill and very stocky appearance. It is larger than all sparrows but the Towhee, and again look for that very thick bill. A good way to find these guys is to listen for their scratching sound on the ground, as they tend to stay hidden very deep into the brush. Next up is the song sparrow, and this is a very, very common sparrow with diverse habitats across all of North America, including marshes, fields, gardens, and shrubby areas. And again, these guys are found in almost all of North America. As far as field marks go, look for the streaked back. We have a central breast spot here on most birds, clean white underbelly, and then some streaking on the flanks. They also have a fairly thick bill and a bit of a white eye ring, and a rusty line that stops at the eye. Their crown is also rusty. Now, there are almost 40 accepted subspecies of the song sparrow, which means the geographic variation of this species is going to be very vast, but all song sparrows are pretty long-tailed. Now, there are quite a few species that the song sparrow could be confused with. Now, the Lincoln sparrow looks a lot like a song sparrow. In fact, I'll show it to you right here. But we'll notice in the Lincoln sparrow, the streaks are a lot more pencil-like versus the song sparrow streaks, which are a lot blurrier. That's also a good way to separate it from the Savannah sparrow. The Savannah sparrows are also a lot grayer than the song sparrow, which all song sparrows have a very reddish color to them. And song sparrows are just smaller than fox sparrows. They also have a smaller bill, and their bill is typically silver instead of the fox sparrow's brown and yellow. Now, to separate from the Vesper Sparrow, again look for the very gray color of the Vesper Sparrow, and Vesper Sparrows have white on the tail, and their tail is a little shorter than the Song Sparrow, while every Song Sparrow does not have any white in its tail. Now, as you're traveling across the states, you will run into different subspecies. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of them. And just remember, just because it doesn't look like your typical song sparrows back home does not mean it is not a song sparrow. So look for that long tail, which all song sparrows have, and then the brown streaking and other field marks like that. And as I've said a lot in this video, color and plumage details like that are only to be relied upon as a confirmation instead of making your ID based on that. In the case of the song sparrow, you really want to look for the tail and the bill and just overall shape instead of color and streaking, because this bird has such a wide geographical variation. Next up is the Lincoln Sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, they're found in brushy areas, marshes, and wetlands across North America. For field marks, these guys are fairly distinctive. They have a white eye-ring, streaked crown, very thin bill, and very pencil-like streaking with a clean underpart. You'll also notice they have a tan mustache stripe here, and then a gray face and nape. There's also some pretty broad streaks that go straight down the back. Overall, just a medium-sized tail. Now, to separate from similar species, the Lincoln Sparrow is just overall sharper than other species. It's just a very crisp sparrow, like a pencil versus a paintbrush. The Lincoln Sparrow is slightly smaller, more slender, and shorter tailed than the swamp and most song sparrows. And often there is a larger breast spot. You can kind of see it in the one on the left here. And that is shared with song sparrows and some swamp sparrows. And do not use this to separate it, as both those species have one. A better way to separate it would be by the fine streaking, as swamp sparrows do not have fine streaking, and on song sparrows it's a lot blurrier, like a paintbrush was used to paint the song sparrow versus a pencil for the Lincoln Sparrow. Now, the Lincoln Sparrow is a very skulky sparrow, often found in dense habitat, and it will often share the same habitat as the song sparrow, so make sure you are identifying them carefully. Next up is the swamp sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, they are found in wetlands, marshes, and swamps across eastern North America. For field marks, the swamp sparrow is a very chunky, dark, bright-winged bird with a bright white throat, which is a great field mark. As far as structures go, you have a fairly long tail with a medium-sized bill, streaked crown, and then an eyeline that stops at the eye, and then a partial eye ring, not always visible on all birds. And then the bright white throat is a great way to identify them. They do have a central breast spot, just like Lincolns and song sparrows, so that is not a good way to identify them. There is often no streaks on its underside. On this one on the right, you can see there's a couple, so occasionally they do have some streaking, but it is not nearly as much as the Lincolns or the song sparrows, so that's a great way to identify them. And these birds are typically found in very dense, wet vegetation, which makes knowing their chip call very helpful, as it is a lot higher pitched than the song sparrow. Next up is the white-throated sparrow, and you can find these guys in woodlands and brushy areas across North America. They breed up in Canada and New England, and then winter down south. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive. They always have their namesake white throat, and then they have an interesting head pattern with white and black stripes, and then as you can see in this bird, there is some pretty prominent yellow lores, but that is not always as prominent as it is in this particular bird. If we look at the one on the right, it is a lot duller, and there's some less yellow than that. There is a faint eye ring, and then we have some streaking on the flanks, but overall just a very clean belly with some white turning into gray as it nears the neck. Now, I will tell you, first winter white-throated sparrows are very streaked below, which is similar to a song sparrow. Instead, focus on size, shape, and behavior, which white-throated sparrows have a low head, horizontal body, and a lot more brown than gray. Now, compared to the white-crowned sparrow, which could technically be confused with an adult white-throated sparrow, the white-crowned sparrow has a much more vertical posture and always looks like its neck is stretched. Now, these guys do have a pretty distinctive song. It's a very clear whistle. If you were to put it to text, it would be like Old Sam Peabody, Peabody. Or if you live in Canada, then it is Oh Sweet Canada, Canada. Next up is the white-crowned sparrow, and as far as habitat goes, they are found in open woodlands, shrubby areas, and tundra, which is where they breed across North America. Typically a winter bird for most of the U.S., but on the West Coast and Rocky Mountains, they do breed at higher elevation. For field marks, these guys are one of the most easily recognized sparrows in North America. The black and white striped crown is distinctive, although in juveniles the black is replaced with brown. They have a yellow bill, or pink in some birds' cases. To separate from similar species, look for that distinctive head pattern, and there is no streaking on the bird's belly. There is a little bit of upper part streaking though, and 2 white wing bars, which isn't super common for sparrows. Now, the easiest way to separate from its most common confusion species, which is the white-throated sparrow, is to think of this. Is the bird that you see a gray bird? Then it's more likely to be a white-crowned sparrow. If it's more of a brown bird, it's probably going to be a white-throated sparrow. Again, color's not a great way to tell them apart, as it can vary a little bit, but that was a great way to just narrow down species pretty quickly. And then the white crowned sparrow does not have the white throat patch that the white-throated sparrow has. Next up is golden-crowned sparrow, and this is a bird strictly of the west coast, found in brushy areas, open woodlands, and shrubby habitats. It winters in the lower 48 states and breeds in Canada and Alaska. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive. We've got its namesake golden crown with 2 black stripes, some upper part streaking, and then kind of a scaly underside, although not all birds have that. It's mostly just a clean belly. Now, to separate from similar species, look for that distinctive head pattern. Some confusing species could be white-throated sparrow, but just remember the golden crowned has very little white on its head or throat. You could confuse it with the white-crowned sparrow, but the golden crowned just often makes a more stockier impression, which is enhanced by its short neck, heavy bill, and horizontal posture. And it's brown instead of the white-crowned sparrow's gray color. For the bill, it's often blackish with an odd purplish black lower mandible, which could be yellow in the winter. As you can kind of see in the cases of these 2 birds, they're starting to turn a little yellow, which is often when most people see them, and it is unlikely to be confused with any other sparrow species. Next up is the Harris's Sparrow, and it is found in brushy areas, woodlands, and shrubby habitats in central North America, and most often time to see them is during the winter in the central United States. For field marks, we have a pretty easy ID here with a lot of black on the face, brown cheeks, and then some streaking on the flanks, and a very clean white belly, which this white belly makes it pretty easy to even identify it from a car. The Peterson's Reference Guide to Sparrows of North America calls the Harris's Sparrow big and bold. The Harris's Sparrow is unlikely to be confused with any other North American bird. To separate from similar species, just look for that distinctive black bib and the stripe that goes all the way up to the face and that very large bill, which is often a orange or pink color. Unlikely to be confused with any other species in its range, but if it's rare for your area, you could confuse it with a male house sparrow or Lapland longspur. The difference is the Harris's Sparrow does not have a very long tail. It's got pink legs, a streaked back, some white wing bars, which aren't always very obvious, but you can kind of see in this bird on the right, there are a few white wing bars there, and very large pink bill. And this bird has been reported to hybridize with white-throated sparrow, with both birds showing an intermediate of these features. Next up is the Lark Sparrow, and this is a bird of open areas, grasslands, and scrubby fields across North America. And I know I've said it before, but this is probably one of the most recognizable sparrows in all of North America, and it has nearly every possible head marking a sparrow could have. We have the bold face pattern with chestnut stripes, white stripes, we've got a white line through the eye here. We have one white wing bar here, and then you can see there's a fainter one here. Central chest spot, and then a very white belly. We've got the black mustache stripe here. So just a very striking overall sparrow. And then there's also, you can't see it in these pictures too well, but in flight there is a lot of white in the tail, which could make it confused with several species, especially the Vesper Sparrow. Overall, the Lark Sparrow is a lot larger than the Vesper Sparrow and has a very bold face pattern too, while the Vesper Sparrow is more gray. And as a side note, the Lark Sparrow is not related to the horned lark at all, even though lark is in its first name. Next up is the Vesper Sparrow, and this is a pretty drab sparrow of grasslands, prairies, and open fields across North America. But if we look closely, there are several identifying field marks. We have the fully complete eye ring, some very fine penciled streaking that stops right before the belly, and then a little bit of streaking on the flanks. Now, a key field mark here that has been relied upon for a while is a lot of white in the tail, especially you can notice this in flight. And this is excellent for confirmation after other things have been assessed. Now, in the summer, birds can look a little messy, which makes the bill look even larger, but it's not that large of a bill. It is a pink color, as you can see here, and is kind of cone-shaped. To separate from the song sparrow, look for a wider tail. The song sparrow has a pretty thin, rounded tail, while this Vesper Sparrow just kind of squares off at the end. It has a little bit of a notch, too. To compare to the Savannah Sparrow, the Vesper Sparrow's tail is a lot broader and longer and less pointed at the end. And in parts of eastern North America, the Vesper Sparrow is not as common as it was before, and this is actually due to reforestation, as they are found in grasslands. So as the east has become more forested, Vesper Sparrows have been moving farther west. And because of that, it's often an over-reported bird, which means birders see it and get confused with other species like a Savannah Sparrow or something, and then think it's the much rarer Vesper Sparrow. Next up is the Sagebrush Sparrow, and for habitat it lives on sagebrush flats in western North America. For field marks we have the gray face, fully complete and pretty thick white eye ring, a couple spots on the chest, some streaking on the flanks, and a very round tail. And it also has a very small black bill. Now there's not very many species that can be confused in its range, but in California and on wintering grounds there's the bell sparrow. Now these two sparrows used to be considered the same species. They were called the sage sparrow, but then fairly recently they were split into the sagebrush sparrow and then the bell sparrow. Now these are very hard to separate, especially on wintering grounds, and a lot of times you might just have to mark it as a bell/sagebrush sparrow, but generally the sagebrush is more paler with more streaking on its back, although this is not very easy to separate, and often you just have to leave the birds as a sage sparrow. Now juvenile black-throated sparrows could be mistaken, but they are easily identified by the long, clear white supercilium on top of their eyes. It has a fairly long blackish tail, and it's often twitched upward, a habit that it shares with bells and black-throated sparrows. Next up is the bell sparrow, and same habitat as the sage sparrow. We have sagebrush habitats in western North America. California mostly, and then its range does go south into Arizona in the winter. To separate from similar species, there aren't any in its range except for the sage sparrow, where it does overlap a little bit, especially on wintering grounds, but the bell sparrow is generally a little darker with less streaking on the back, although that is very hard to separate, and again it's best to just identify as the sage sparrow. And it's pretty common in the right habitat, and coastal populations have a bit of a bluish tint to the head. Field marks are pretty much the same as the sage sparrow. Next up is the Lark Bunting, and it's not a lark or a bunting, it's a sparrow. Commonly found on large expanses of native grasslands with sagebrush, Great Plains region of the US, and a little bit of Canada. Winters in Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive. We see on the males that big white wing patch and very thick blue bill. Females and non-breeding males share the same blue bill. They also have some streaking on the flanks and just a very stocky, small-headed sparrow. The males, as you can see in this top picture, are very distinctive in flight, and the females have a little bit of a white patch too. Unlikely to be confused with other species. The females and non-breeding males are going to be the biggest confusion. Just look for a little bit of white on the outer tail feathers and that bluish thick bill. And the Lark Bunting's tail is very short and broad too. Now you could confuse a Lark Bunting with a bobolink, but just look for that very thick conical bill. Next up is the yellow-eyed Junco, and as far as habitat goes, they are found in montane pine oak forests, preferring high elevation areas in Mexico and southeastern Arizona. Often seen in open woodlands and brushy habitats too. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive. Look for the overall just gray appearance, and then we have that rusty back and classic yellow eye. Also a two-tone bill, unlike the dark-eyed Junco, which has a completely pink bill. Now it can be confused with the dark-eyed Junco, as the western subspecies of the dark-eyed Junco have some rusty wings. Just look for that gray head and then distinctive eye. And their range doesn't overlap too much, but in the winter a few yellow-eyed Juncos come down from higher elevations and can mix at feeders with the dark-eyed Junco. They are known for their preference for higher altitudes and are often seen in flocks foraging on the ground or even in low vegetation, and they are just as likely to sing from a bush as they are from a treetop. Next up is dark-eyed Junco, and this is a very common bird across all kinds of habitats, including woodlands, gardens, and open areas across North America. They do come to feeders, and in the winter are a common feeder bird in the eastern United States, but in the western United States they are found year-round in most places. As far as field marks go, we have a lot of variation within the dark-eyed Junco species, but always look for that pink bill, white edged tail feathers, and white belly. This right here is the slate-colored subspecies, but we also have a few more subspecies. This, I believe, is the Oregon subspecies. You can still see white edged tail and pink bill. We have another subspecies here, and there's pink bill and white edged tail as well. They also have pink tarsus and feet too. Next up is the spotted towhee, and this is a bird found in brushy areas, chaparral, and open woodlands in western North America. They prefer very dense shrubs and undergrowth. For field marks, these guys are quite distinctive. We have the red or orange eye, a lot of spotting on the black back, chestnut flanks, and white belly. Pretty large for a sparrow, so pretty distinctive if seen well. However, They can be pretty easily confused with an eastern towhee, although there's only a little overlap in winter. However, to tell apart from the eastern towhee right here, you'll notice on the eastern here there's very few white spots, and they actually look a little bit more like streaks. Spotted towhee also has a different song than the eastern towhee. And a quick note here, the spotting is largest and whitest in the eastern part of its range, which does help quite a bit when separating from the eastern towhee. Next up is eastern towhee. We kind of already talked about it a bit, but it is found in thickets, brushy areas, and woodland edges across eastern and central North America. Field marks, we have the black head, females are brown though, and then the red eye, although I believe there's a subspecies in Florida that has a white eye, which is kind of interesting. Unmistakable over much of its range, the rufous sides help a lot, and white belly. Pretty large for a typical sparrow too. And then to separate from the spotted towhee, note the lack of white spots. Their song, if put into words, would be like drink your tea, and it's very distinctive and can really help find them and identify them. We have next the green-tailed towhee, and for habitat they are found in mountainous regions with dense undergrowth, which includes coniferous and mixed forests in the western United States. For field marks, we have the olive green upper parts, gray chest area, and some white on the undersides. Also a pretty long green tail. We have the white throat patch, and then the rufous crown. The eye is pretty dark, and then the bill can be a blackish to a silver color. With all these combined, they are pretty unique, unlikely to be confused with other sparrow species. However, you could confuse it with the olive sparrow, and their range overlaps a little bit in winter. Just the olive sparrow is a lot smaller and has streaks on the head instead of just a plain rufous cap. Next is the canyon towhee, and it lives in arid habitats including deserts, canyons, and scrublands in the southwestern United States. For field marks, a very plain bird with very little streaking, and we do have a bit of a rufous cap and very thin eye ring. Again, it's a towhee, so it's going to be larger than most sparrows, so unlikely to be confused with other sparrows except for the California towhee. That is the one right here, and the way to tell them apart is mostly by range. There's very little overlap, although it could happen technically, but the canyon towhee has a rufous cap, while the California towhee does not. So that's really the best field marks. They also sound a lot different, so you might want to check that out too, just so you're prepared in case one happens to be out of range. Speaking of the California towhee, it is found in scrublands and gardens along the Pacific coast of North America. For field marks, we have a very plain plumage, no streaking, kind of cone-shaped bill with very little eye ring, and then to separate from the canyon towhee, which we just talked about, just note range for most of it, and then the lack of a rufous cap. And then they do sound quite a bit different. Last towhee is the Abert's towhee. Now it's found in arid scrublands, desert habitats, and brushy areas of the southwestern United States. For field marks, few birds are as unmistakable as this, especially when it comes to towhees. We have a long tail, kind of a pinkish tint, pinkish to brown, kind of, and then the black area by its beak, a very thick white to sometimes pink bill, and then the dark eye, which that really helps separate these from other towhees. Could be confused with canyon and California towhees, just a lot lighter color, and then of course the black by its eye and bill. Now, fun fact is 80% of the Abert's towhees breed in Arizona, and you can often find these guys foraging on the ground in desert vegetation. Now, congratulations, you made it through the end of this video, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd share this video with 3 of your birding friends, and once you're done with that, go watch this quiz of all the sparrows that you just learned.